So this is round two of Lewis and Dominic. Opening heart, open heart,
Mm.
open heart.
Open heart conversation. The constant conversation.
So
Darshan.
the darshan was to get three questions. Dominic asked me three questions, and I've got three questions for Dominic. So the first question is, what is your mission in life?
To remember my mission live. So the big calling that I've had throughout my life, it's sometimes it's manifested gigantically. I've often talked about having a messianic complex. Obviously, people call me Jesus all the time, or used to, but still, I didn't do this to look like Jesus. And one of the reflections I had when I was in Oregon was I was like, maybe subconsciously I did do this to look like Jesus because I felt powerless and I wanted to be powerful. And he was one of the biggest models of a powerful person, not some weird emperor king thing. He was somebody who could fucking part the sea, or Moses did that, but you know what I mean. He could. Yeah. That was like, that's the kind of power I want. Yeah, and I don't. So I don't know. I was an atheist when I first grew my hair and beard out. So I don't think I did that on purpose, but it could have been some innate thing. But anyway, I really, in my spiritual development, when I got a taste. I mean, again, I grew up Christian. It didn't make any sense to me, so I can't really say it was my spirituality or religion. I just thought it was some kind of entertainment. I liked singing. And then I was an atheist as soon as I became intelligent, and I started trying to apply scientific intelligence to the world and the magic of chaos and randomness. And when I started touching spirituality again, it was all about oneness. And the pain of that was that I was really tortured by looking at the world and seeing mostly exploitation and abuse. And that was just everything I saw, the way men treated women, the way Americans treated the other countries, the history of white people on the planet. I was just like, this is all exploitation and abuse, and I don't want any part of this at all. But as I started to touch oneness and feel like, actually, instead of it just being a concept and just being like, wait a minute, so if we're all one, I actually had a solipsistic problem when I was young. So I was like, if we're all one, then this is my fault. It's my fault that there's war in the Middle East. It's my fault that there's, starvation in Africa, and it's my fault that the Native Americans have been relegated to these terrible deserts. I took it all on personally. It's my fault that women, and I could feel inside of me the masculine suppressing the feminine. I could feel inside of me the segregation of difference. And it became like, again, I took on this Messiah complex of somehow I can save the world by righting all the wrongs inside of myself. And so it was narcissistic. It was that classic teenage, young 20 thing of just being like, I am the center of the world, which they say about people all the time. And I didn't realize that I was just literally playing that out, that I was literally just, this is, so it was really big and it was really heavy and it was daunting. But it was, I would soar into realms of like, yes, I can do this. I can feel it. And I started to step back from that as I aged through my 20s to try to get into practical things like encouraging everyone to walk barefoot and be naked more. And I saw that as a spiritual, political, gigantic thing to encourage people to do, because I was like, if you're naked and natural, you're not hiding what you're actually being. If you eat garbage food, you're going to smell horrible. You put pure perfume and deodorant on yourself so that you won't smell how toxic you are. If you wear clothes, it's because you have the shame and you're hiding, and you can tell lies easier because you're hidden. And if you're naked and you're around people and you see their openness, then it just gives you a joy and a safety. And the safety allows your heart to open, and it makes you happier, and you being happier around other people makes them happier, and then we're all happier together. And similarly, that if you're barefoot and you're walking on the planet, you learn how to walk on it carefully. You learn to walk on it with attention, and then that translates into all of your actions. Like, do I really need to use this plastic bag? Do I really need to, buy more of these things? And because, at least for me, that it becomes a way of making love with the earth. And if you make love with the earth, if you imagine the earth as your lover, one of the reasons I think we're manifested all is to make love with the earth and be made like, the wind wants to play with your hair and feel the soft caress of your feet on her skin. There's a quote from an author that I don't remember right now, but I that really affected me when I read that. The wind wants to play with your hair, and the earth wants to feel the soft caress of your feet. So it became something that I've been modeling, a type of integrity, because that was what I always wanted when I was younger, a type of integrity and a type of freedom. And it's, again, this has been just recently. I went to Serbia a few years ago, and a lot of people throughout my travels would always say, oh, you're so free and you're so lighthearted, you're a free spirit. And I just felt like I was in prison on this planet. I felt like I was like, I can't control the world, and the world keeps abusing each other, and I don't know how to stop that. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to heal it. So I don't feel free because I have to witness it. Like, I have to. That's my only job, is to watch, is to feel with an open heart the world. And there's lots of joys and there's lots of beauty, but there's so much suffering.
Sadness.
And it's just, that's my job. So that's part of my mission, but also to model it. And I guess I brought up Serbia a second ago because I've always felt like I wasn't free. And last year when I did my birthday project, one of the guys I met in Serbia who became a Facebook friend, I was writing these essays about my ego constructs, like the beliefs either I held about myself or other people held about myself. It was right when I was getting into the Buddhism retreats, so I was really examining, like, what are my ego constructs? And this guy from Croatia wrote me, and he was like, it is amazing, because he's also a writer. He's like, it is amazing to read your writing. I have never experienced anyone so free. The way you're open, the way you're expressing yourself, and the bonds you have broken to set yourself free. And it was right around then that other random people would say that to me over and over and over, and I really had to respect that. I was like, I am freer than most people.
That's why I call you freedom.
Freedom.
Yeah.
And I had to work really hard to get free, and it's something that I wasn't honoring that process, that I worked so hard. Yeah.
But you went through these things before I met you? Because you were pretty free when I met you.
Well, yeah. I mean,
You've been getting freer.
yeah, because again, it's a constant coming out process. Like, when you feel like you're out, then you find areas you're hiding, and you still have to come out. When you feel like you're free, you're like, oh, I'm free. And you're pulled back. You think I'm free here, and you find places that snag you. So that's a continual process.
Yeah.
It's a continual process.
And you model it for others and inspire others.
Right, and so more than preaching, which I do. I mean, I love writing, I love telling stories, and I love answering questions and giving advice and silly stuff like that. But part of what I do as well is just model it.
Model it.
Yeah, because some people need dictation. Some people need explanation, and they need instruction and guidance, and a lot of people just want to see it. And if they just see it, they're like, oh, I mean, there's somebody who recently started Facebook stalking me, kind of. He sends me lots of messages, and he's this huge muscle builder from New Jersey. He's this big black man. And he's just like, he's said many times now, he's just sent me a message, I want you to teach me to be free like you. And I keep thinking, like, you can't be free like me. You can be free like you can be free. But I can't pretend to understand how to make you free. But together we could probably figure it out.
I have the same thing when people ask me questions. I say, you already have the answer. The answer is inside of you. So I'm pushing it. You're pushing this back to him, and I do the same in the sense that the answer is inside of you. Now, if we talk, you will be forced to articulate the answer, but it's not going to come from me. It's not outside of you. Nothing is outside of us. It's all inside.
Yeah.
So I get what I'm saying. I get what you're saying to this guy, and you're telling him it's inside of you. But you inspire people by seeing freedom. They say, okay, it's possible to do it. It's possible, and there's now I know somebody's done it.
Yeah.
So the question was, what is your mission in life? And part of it is a big part perhaps, is to teach by example and inspire people that freedom, in the highest sense, spiritual freedom.
Yeah, not in the American version of freedom.
Spiritual.
Not the freedom that's given to you, but the freedom that you claim
The
for
freedom
yourself.
that comes from being a sovereign being, a sovereign
being.
sovereign spiritual being on this planet, who came here to make things better.
Yeah, to make things better, and also to witness the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, again, I feel like that's important. There's a responsibility to being free, and which is why I would always get hung up on that and be like, I'm not free because I have this responsibility.
That's a key word.
Yeah.
Alice Bailey said, a sense of responsibility is the beginning of spiritual understanding. So people pretend to be spiritual, this, that, and the other, but if they have no sense of responsibility, they haven't put the first foot on the path.
Right, a lot of people nowadays call that spiritual bypass. When you're like, oh, I don't have to do that because I'm so evolved. You're missing the point.
I'm gonna shit on you. It's all one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna rob you. It's all one though. Don't worry.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Protect yourself.
Yeah.
No, people
I can get away with it because, I'm more evolved than you are, so I have a higher vibration.
Give me your wife.
Yeah.
Than you are.
Yeah.
You know Muji? He's very famous. Like,
I've heard of. I've
Yeah,
seen
yeah.
it.
Because my friend dated him, and he's into the Who Am I question, Ramana Maharshi. But she was dating before he became a famous guru. But he had a big screaming match with one time on the bus was saying, he goes, "You don't know who you are. I know who I am." I'm like,
Oh my God,
it's kinda funny.
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love it when that happens.
But who am I? Yeah. That's
Yeah.
Well, who am I?
yeah.
So have we answered that question?
Do you feel
I
satisfied with
feel
that answer?
satisfied with that answer. Yeah,
feel
yeah.
satisfied
The
with
question
that
was, what is your mission in life? So the second question is, what are the greatest influences in your life?
My mind immediately went to media, music and books and movies, and then it flashed instantly into the sky and trees. So, there's so many opportunities in our life when we've noticed. Oh, I stayed with a friend in Portland who's 76 now, and he told me, I love this. He said, so one day I sat down and I wrote a list of all of the decisions I'd made, like the choices I'd made or the things that had happened to me that had changed my life for the better. And I started just making this short list, and soon it was 4 pages long.
Wow.
And after that, it was a few days later, I would just keep adding to it. And it was a few weeks after this that I realized, oh, well, what choices have I made or things that have happened to me that have changed my life for the bad? And I only put a few things on there. And I was really touched by that because I used to be so hung up, like in a victim mentality, about the things that I'd been beholden to because of the things that had happened to me. And it was such a nice thing to reflect on. Well, what are the things, to just turn your perspective to be like, well, what are all the things that have changed my life for the better, that have really influenced me? And I was talking to you about Ginsberg a few days ago. Like Ginsberg, I was introduced to when I was 13. My best female friend was dating an older boy, and he told the story of meeting Ginsberg with a friend of his at a poetry reading, and his friend was like gay and totally infatuated with Ginsberg and was talking to Ginsberg, and Ginsberg was like, you know what, I've got to have dinner with these people and got a couple other things to do, but then I'll be back at my hotel. Here's my key. I'll get another one from the front desk. Why don't you just meet me in my room at like 10 p.m. And so the kid's just like terrified but excited because he gets to spend personal time with Ginsberg, and of course he goes up there and Ginsberg reads him the poem "Sweet Boy, Give Me Your Ass," and then they have sex. And so then this boy reads me this poem, "Sweet Boy, Give Me Your Ass." So I wasn't introduced to Ginsberg through Howell. I was introduced to Ginsberg through a poem called "Sweet Boy, Give Me Your Ass." And I was 13 or something, 13 or 14. I was really young to be being introduced to Ginsberg, but I had already started having sex with men. And
at that age?
yeah, I started having sex when I was 12. Sex is a big influence on my life. I started having sex when I was 12 with a friend, and it was very like, we had a very kind of mystical friendship. We had created a god together, and we would worship this god. Yeah, and we would try to practice telepathy together. It was it was a nice friendship. We had a very fantasy life together, and then we started having sex, and all of it dropped down to this level. And it was like, how many times can we come in an evening? And it was interesting, but after a few months of it, I was like, I liked our friendship better before. Can we stop having sex? And it broke our friendship, and we stopped being friends. But I started having sex with other people and adults, and I was really attracted to like teachers and authority figures because I was like, these are adults and they have power. And if I can, and I really had this concept that if I can seduce them, then I get their power.
Right.
Like I was very aware of that. Yeah. And as soon as I realized that there was a power I had access to, I was like, well, what do I do with this? And that was this long evolution, again, in my sexual development, that I was like, how can I use sex for the good? Because I mean, a very poignant story I had was when I first went to Portland. I was intrigued to go there because of a movie called My Own Private Idaho. Have you seen that?
Seen it,
right?
Yeah.
So it's about prostitutes in Portland. And I ended up working at a fucking gay bathhouse that I got led to from the first time I ever got paid to give a massage. And, it was like, well, if he might pay you more if you finish him off. So it had this whole sexual strand behind it. And when I was working at this bathhouse, a construction worker came in and he asked me to suck his cock. And so I went upstairs with him and he said, I want you to totally drain me. So I had been meditating for a while and I had been doing yoga for a while. and I had and Reiki, and I just gotten attuned in Reiki, and so I was like, when I'm sucking his cock, this is, I did this cock sucking workshop.
Yeah.
This was a very important part of this process. I start sucking his cock and I can feel his whole body, and he says, I want you to drain me. So I get a grip of all of his energy going through his body, and I feel it all vibrating, and as he gets closer and closer to orgasm, and then when he comes, I just take it all.
Yeah.
Because he says, I want you to drain me.
Yeah.
And he just fell over and collapsed and passed out.
Wow.
And I was like,
uh-oh.
maybe you shouldn't take
All
everything.
of it.
Yeah. Maybe you shouldn't take everything. And I became really like careful after that.
Yeah.
That I was like, don't take. Like, it's so easy to
So
be a
what happened?
vampire.
He
Don't.
fell out, then he came back.
Well, he came
right?
back. Yeah. I mean, it didn't kill him.
Yeah.
But I have felt, there was a lover that I had in New York who I really felt that he was an old man, and he wasn't happy with his life. He was a lawyer, he was a judge,
Yeah.
but he was old and he didn't want to be old. He's tired of all of his friends dying. He didn't have a boyfriend, and I felt, and he liked, like, we'd get together, he'd smoke pot, he'd do drugs, and he would feel like he wanted to die. And I really felt when I was sucking his cock, there was this wish in him, because this is something I learned from an Arabic story when I was younger, and I don't know if this is true, but I always imagine it, that there was saying the sweetest experience in life is to have an orgasm and slit the throat of the person you're having sex with, so that you get their life force when you come. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It was an Arabic story I heard when I was a teenager, that while you're having, it was done in a heterosexual story, that like when you're fucking a woman, when you're starting to come, you slit her throat so that her life force escapes her body, and you bind it with your orgasm.
That is so repulsive.
So when I was living in Amsterdam, Moroccans were doing this to people in the park. They were having faggots suck their cock and slitting their throats.
Really?
Yeah, and so and I was
Where was this? Where?
in Amsterdam, in the Ulster Park.
Ulster Park.
And I was sucking cock in the Ulster Park a lot, and I was having sex with Moroccans, and people were like, "That's very dangerous," and this was
Dangerous.
actually happening. And I was like, "Wow, I heard about that when I was a teenager. I didn't know Arabic people actually did that. I thought it was some like old 1001 Nights story. It's probably rare."
Yeah.
But I believe
so.
but this gets back to what, like, some of my biggest influences, that I believed that sex was an incredibly magical act. That, like, it's something people use as candy, people use it as distraction, people use it as entertainment, people use it as a sedative to go to sleep at night. But it's the most powerful thing that every human has accessible to them. They make life with it. You know, you can make another person alive with your sexual energy, and that's a fascinating power. So what is the gay power? You know, one of the demonizations of homosexual sex when I was a kid was that God gave us sex for procreation, and that, only procreation, and that the gay people were evil because they were using sex for recreation.
Right.
And I was just like, well, how about we just change the emphasis a little and it becomes recreation?
Or creation.
Recreation.
Yeah, recreation.
Because we are created, we are beings incarnate, but if we fuck each other, we can recreate each other in beautiful images. We can give each other more creativity, more beauty, more power, more health, more integration.
Exactly.
That's one of the responsibilities of our sexual lives, and that one of the reasons that I believed AIDS existed was we were coming out, and we had all this programming that God hated us, our parents hated us, we hated ourselves. So every time we had sex with somebody, it was like, I hate you for me being gay. I hate you for being gay. So we were recreating each other in image of sickness and death and hatred. And that we were poisoning each other. And so that was because I grew up in AIDS, right? I became sexually aware when everybody was dying of AIDS in the mid 80s.
Right.
So sex was very important and influential in my life. And I was like, and I saw it demonized and segregated in the Midwest. I was like, how can I make this? And also the first time I learned yoga, I learned yoga from a husband and wife team when I was the age of 18. This totally changed my life. So this was one of the big influences on my life.
Yeah.
A girl who was a coke addict, I went to dinner with her, and one of her mother's friends was this yoga teacher, and she invited me to do a work trade to take care of her kids, and they'd teach me 2 classes a day. And one of the classes was from like a skinny yoga woman, and the other class was from her chubby Jewish husband.
Oh, that's cute.
And so I wanted to have sex with him, right? But he would talk about, he was like, when you do yoga every day, you get to a point where every breath is orgasm. All of life is orgasm. You don't need to smoke pot anymore. You don't need to do drugs anymore. Everything is a constant orgasm. And this is like me, I'm 18, so I'm like, I want to live in a constant orgasm. So I really, and I later got into Willem Reich and that whole idea of the orgone, this idea that there's so much magic in what we can do with our sexual energy, and how do we integrate that. Yoga brought me out of the atheism that I was into, because yoga, I didn't understand this at the time. It's a theistic practice.
Yeah, it is.
It's a lot of people see it as just this exercise thing, and I'm like, it's an actual theistic practice. You're binding yourself with God.
It means union.
Yeah, but with
Union
God.
with
It's a devotional practice to a deity, and that really changed my life. It taught me to be in my body, because before that, I was in my mind. Like what you said earlier about having a pygmy heart, I used to say I was emotionally retarded.
Yeah.
That I'd put so much energy into my mind and my creativity and my smarts and my body, because my dad wanted me to do
gets
sports.
rewarded at school.
But my dad wanted me to play sports, so I was terrible at them, but I did tons of sports and working in the yard, so I had a body and I had a mind, which a lot of people don't have so gratefully I had that, but my emotions were retarded.
Yeah.
And it took me years to develop them. So drugs have been a great influence. I mean, I didn't ask you questions about ganja, and I kind of wanted to, but that I was introduced to ganja when I was 13.
But I mentioned it as an influence.
Yes, as an influence.
I mentioned it as a physical influence. Ganja,
LSD totally changed my life. I have so many stories about that.
The Beatles and the book by Alan Watts. Those are the influences: physical, emotional, mental. So drugs are physically, they affect you physically.
Yeah,
the chemistry of your brain.
And they were so important. I was a sickly child. I don't know if I've told you this story.
You told me that.
I was a sickly child for years, and the doctor said that I had AIDS when I was 16.
What?
Yeah.
You never told me that.
Yeah, when I was 16, I had been sick for years, and my mother suggested I go get blood work. She had taken me to all these alternative healers, magnet healers, acupuncturists, Reiki healers, and none of them were really helping. And I'd been on antibiotics for years, nothing was working. Wow. So I went to a doctor and got blood work done, and I had 70 T cells. And the doctor was like, well, we would say you have AIDS. And again, this is the early 90s, and I'm gay, and I'm like, oh, fuck. And he said, we don't know what's wrong. We can give you drugs to kill the stuff in your system, but you don't have HIV, which is what we think causes AIDS, so we don't know what's causing this. Yeah. And I went and told a friend of mine, and he said, Dominic, you just hate life, and you're just letting yourself wither away instead of killing yourself. You're just passively committing suicide. And a few weeks later, I did LSD at a party, and I walked out of the party and went into the forest at night. And I stayed there until dawn. It was pretty close to dawn when that happened anyway, but I went out in the dark, and then light started coming. And in that half-light, fairies came out of the forest. It was one of the only times that I actually saw fairies. Like, the spirits came out of the trees and the rocks and the water and the dirt.
Hear that,
and,
kids? Hear that?
Yeah. And they were just like, you don't have to be sick anymore. Your heart is closed. You have a whole bunch of beliefs that aren't necessarily untrue. They're just not useful.
That's the key.
And they're like,
judgment.
They're like, it's not that your beliefs are untrue, but they're just not useful. So you just need to let go of all of the things you believe and just see the world as it is when it's happening. And I was like, oh. And they're like, you just have to let love in, because you wither away without love. Yeah. So learning to love, the evolution of love for me, it was a long path. I often tell people that, like, I just wanted to die, but I didn't want to commit suicide, so I jumped off a cliff to see if I would die, but instead I flew. Yeah. That the world just caught me and took care of me and said, the world's not a terrible place. It's filled with beautiful people. And I didn't know that. The world showed me love, it modeled love, and I looked at people who were grateful and who were loving and who were present and patient, and I said, I want to be like that. I don't want to be an angry artist anymore. I want to be, because I was really enamored by anger when I was younger. I thought it was good, and I don't like it so much anymore.
Yeah. We can transform it.
So and books. I started. My father. I probably told you this story. My father was dyslexic, so he can't read very well.
Tell me that. Yeah.
So he would say reading was for sissies. He wanted us to play sports, and he didn't want us to read.
Oh, wow.
And my godfather, his wife, I love. She was the weirdo in the family, and she said, "You guys don't read. You play video games and you watch television, and this is." I'm going to lock you in rooms separately so you can't talk to each other, and you don't have to read, but that's all you can do. She gave us stacks of books, and we just, I know for myself, I just sat there for a few hours, like looking through her drawers and, playing with things until eventually I picked up a book, and it was like a Hardy Boys book, and I started reading it, but I very quickly went from there into Greek mythology and sci-fi, and then Tolkien, and Lord of the Rings and all that shit, and it totally changed my life to start reading.
One book leads to 3, and 3 lead to 9.
Yeah.
That's good.
And the personality I have now, I remember deciding at one point, the characters in books have amazing things happen to them. They're not like everyday people. I'm going to be that kind of person.
Yeah.
I want to have amazing things happen to me. I want to be the central to the story.
I'll tell you a little secret. Here's this spoiler alert. Real life is more amazing than fiction. Yeah.
I know I don't read books anymore.
No, I hardly read books.
I mean, novels. I sometimes miss reading novels, but life is more interesting
Life
than
is more
novels.
interesting,
Yeah.
The real thing is more interesting than the fantasy.
Absolutely. We can write,
It's
I mean,
more
it's-
imaginative.
But there's still good. I was telling Aaron to read a book called The Golden Compass. I don't know if there was a movie. There's a movie that came out a few years ago where they based on this book, The Golden Compass, where your soul is outside of you as opposed to inside of you. It's an alternate reality,
Okay.
and the soul manifests as different animals. And when you hit puberty, it solidifies as one animal.
Oh.
And the is it?
Sci-fi or
It was meant.
fantasy?
Yeah.
kind of thing.
It was aimed. Yeah, it was aimed at.
Narnia.
It was a British author, Philip Pullman, and it was aimed at young adults. But what's the reason only the first movie got made and they didn't end up doing all three of them was that the whole flow of the book is that it's these innocent pubescent children from different dimensions that find each other, and they go into another dimension where they find the great war of existence, and there's like witches stealing people's souls and all this craziness, but their task, without them knowing it and with pure innocent hearts, they kill God and become the new Adam and Eve to bring in the new epoch. So that was what Philip, Pullman had this idea, and the American people were terrified that this movie was being made about these kids innocently killing God so that the world could begin again without all this hatred, and the old paradigm could die off and a new paradigm could be born. It's an amazing young adult book. It's
Yeah,
really,
that is amazing.
yeah. Well, they made a film of the first book, but they
Not
didn't.
the part where they kill God, though. They left that.
No, that's in the third book.
Yeah.
But the first book, it's called they called the movie The Golden Compass, which is
James Bond guy was Timothy Dalton.
no.
Anyway.
Yeah, he's really great. But they left off the end
Yeah.
because it's really horrific. I mean, the book has so much horrific stuff in it that's a metaphor for what happens in society, that the government ends up learning how to separate people from their souls, and they use the power of separating people. Oh, it gives me chills to create a sky bridge to another dimension. It has a lot of interdimensional stuff, so it's really it's great. The Golden Compass, the name they use for it in the book is the alethiometer. It's how you can tell if people are telling the truth, and how you can be in touch with your own guidance and know your own truth. And only certain people can use the Golden Compass, and the main character can. She's one of those people who knows how to use the alethiometer. And I was like, yeah, it's a great. I thought it was but again, like back when I was reading novels, that was like one of the last series of novels I read when I moved to New York. And in this new era of smartphones, we're reading articles all the time, and we're watching videos, and we don't have time to settle into fantasy worlds in the same way we did.
And when I see a video, I look at the first thing I do is how long is it?
Yeah, do I have time
Because
for
do I
that?
have time to see that? Because if it's 33 minutes
Attention
long.
spans are like,
But people say that about, Aaron and I were talking about that with writing as well. That
Yeah.
if your writing is longer than 2 sentences, you lose 90% of your audience.
Yeah, it seems that way.
People just have very short attention
You were
spans.
segueing into my third question, which had to do with HIV.
Mm.
And I wanted to know your relationship to HIV and what you've learned from it and about it.
All right. So, again, I was classified as having HIV, or I was having AIDS when I was 16, and
But you didn't.
but I didn't. And after I had this experience with the fairies, I stopped being sick. I was a sickly child from like the age of 8 up
Yeah.
until 16, and then I just stopped being sick.
Really?
Yeah.
You were?
Yeah, I was a very sickly child. I always had health problems, chronic sinus infections and bronchitis and whatever.
Yeah.
And then I stopped being sick. And again, I had this very clear idea that to have sex meant that I was going to die of AIDS, because that's what it meant to be gay at that time.
At that time.
When I came out to my mother, she cried for 4 hours.
Yeah.
And I let her cry for a while because I thought that was an honorable thing that she could. I'd
Yeah.
let her have her emotions. But after for 4 hours of her crying, I came downstairs. I was like, "Mom, I'm so sorry that it upsets you so much that I'm gay." And she said, "Honey, I'm not crying that you're gay. I just don't want to see you die of AIDS." And I was like, "Oh,
My wife went through that too. My wife was very, very concerned about that.
what?" Knowing she was
Yeah,
less
knowing-
upset about you being gay and more
Yeah,
worried
she
about
was
you dying
more worried.
of AIDS.
Well, she was more worried. She even said at one point, "I've saved you from AIDS,"
Yeah.
and she did, and she did.
yeah,
Because if she hadn't have been around there, I'm sure I would have been a wild, crazy guy, and I'd be on the AIDS quilt.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
she said that to me, and one of the last things she said was, "You are the man for me," which I made a song out of. It's on my album about her. You are the man for me.
And do you
She
feel?
came to that conclusion.
Do you feel like part of her, passing on, was to let you have that next chapter of your life, like a conscious?
It was. She was born with a hole in her heart, and it was. And she had open heart surgery before she met me, but she had an irregular beat. It was like a little bird beat. So she was not long for this world anyway. And it could be that we both extended each other's lives, both of us. And what she said to me 3 days before she died, I just want to be pure consciousness and only take a body when I need it. She said that directly. And I heard that and I thought, oh, that'll take you 30 years. And she meant now. And three days later, she was dead.
So she didn't have a long death process. It was
no, she was gone in a minute. She had a blood clot to the brain and she was gone. 1 minute she was there, the next minute she was gone, and I was going, what? Wait a minute, where's she?
Barbara!
So, well, she's here right now.
Yes.
But she was like a helium balloon. She didn't want to be here, but the only thing that kept her on the earth was our daughter.
Yeah.
And as soon as she understood that I would take care of our daughter the way she wanted me to do it, not the way I might have done it, but the way she wanted, when she got
she
that,
understood that.
then she could just let go of the string, and the helium balloon just went right up. She said to me, I know you're going to be okay, Louis. You're okay. You don't need me to be here. You'll be fine.
And Spirit, does Spirit have a similar relationship with Barbara that you have? Does she still feel her?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Spirit channels Barbara.
So
Spirit channels Barbara.
So HIV.
Oh, we were talking about HIV. And you kind of segued into it, notice,
right,
without my asking you the question.
Exactly, yeah. The intention's there. So again, like, I had a lot of wondering, like, what HIV was. And as I was talking about earlier, when I became to start working with sex as an energy, as an action, as a magic, then I was like, oh, this is where it comes from. It's not some plot from a government. It was any more than anything else in culture is. But it was that we'd had this long programming in this country where men weren't allowed to touch each other, and then there was this hatred about loving each other and this about having sex. I mean, literally, when I came out to my dad and he was just like, oh, the things you do, it makes me sick. It makes me want to vomit. Hearing it in his voice, it was visceral for him. It was a real thing that he felt. Yeah. So he had those impulses, and I said, well, you must, to be able to feel it, that real, you must know what it feels to want that. He's like, all men have those desires. You're not supposed to act on them. Yeah. So that kind of thing, like when we choose to be free and we break the bonds, like and it's something that I was saying earlier, that I had to make peace with myself going crazy when I was younger. I had friends that got put in mental institutions. Ginsburg had a big thing about being put in a mental institution, Lou Reed, other people. So I was like, I have to be at peace with going crazy, or I'm really going to go crazy. Yeah. I have to allow myself to go crazy.
Did you ever go to a mental institution? No. I did.
You did?
I was in a mental institution, yeah.
For how long?
It was two of them. I was in there as long as the insurance covered it, and then I was in a private one as long as the insurance covered it. When the insurance ran out, I had to go to a public one, and I was there as long until I realized that I was being punished. Yeah. I was being punished for being different.
Did you get electroshock?
No, they didn't do that, but they gave me terrible drugs. Yeah. Terrible drugs. I was 24. And it all became because of PCP. I tried some this animal tranquilizer.
Oh yeah,
PCP.
Angel dust.
Angel dust, and it was a result of that. And so the thing was,
sometimes drugs aren't good
for us. It was drugs that got me into the mental hospital, and was stopping drugs that got me out. Yeah. And then Barbara got pregnant, and I became a father. Being a father is growing up at gunpoint. A gun is in your back, and you have to grow up now because you're responsible for another life. Yep. And that's what did it. That's it made that flip.
When was the second age you were in a mental institution, or both?
No, it was the same thing. I went into a private institution, then the insurance ran out, and so then they moved me to a public one, and then I realized I'm just being punished, and if I stop annoying, everybody was in there because they were annoying people. Yeah, it was just because you were annoying. Stop being annoying, and you won't be in the hospital. And I got it. I understood that. And then later on, I was a counselor for drug addicts, and I could say, I did that. When I got to India and told a friend about this, she said, you had that experience so that you could help others. Yeah. So people could, if a person says, they put me in a mental hospital, blah, blah, I say, yeah, I did that too. And so getting into the Foreign Service was very difficult because of my mental hospital thing. So the first 2 years, I had to meet with a psychiatrist. The very psychiatrist who tests the guys who have their finger on the nuclear button was the guy who interviewed me. And after I had to meet with a psychiatrist and they have to analyze me. After the second year, the second guy said, you don't have to do this anymore, you're okay. So I kind of got through that. And then when people say, I was in a mental hospital, I said, yeah, I was too. I figured out, don't be annoying, you won't be put in a mental hospital.
Well, and learn how to
don't be annoying.
Be with people, and not
Listen,
push them too far past their comfort
I
zone.
was hysterical, and it was fear. Hysteria is fear.
So this gets back into the story then.
Yeah,
So I was raised with this idea that if you have sex, you're going to die, and that sex was the most powerful magic we had.
Right.
So I had a little bit of the radical paranoia that people go through, of feeling like we're repressed in the society, and there's this great truth, like, people are like, there's a cure for cancer, and they just kill the people who have it. People say that kind of thing all the time, and it's true and it's not true. But the thing is, there's a million cures for things. But with sex, I was like, sex is this incredible magic we have, and with this we can create the new world, and with this we can create the new, and with this we can heal everyone, and with this we can stop all war.
Yes.
If it's free.
That's
and
a
if it's
big
open.
Thing. That's a big thing. I want to interrupt just for a second, because I think it makes it harder to discipline an army if men are loving each other.
Yeah.
Especially if they're living and showering together,
Yeah.
and they're loving each other. You can't discipline an army.
There's a beautiful book I read about the whole army of Thebai, which was in ancient Greece. They won Sparta. And they were all lovers.
They were all lovers, and they fought back to back. So not only were they defending their country, but they were defending their actual lover right behind them, and they were a formidable force. So you can't say that gay people can't be in the army, because that was proof that they can. But if men are disposed to loving each other rather than harming each other, it makes discipline in an army more difficult. And I'll shut up because this is your.
It's fine. That's fine. But that movie. They made a movie about that and totally cut the gay out of it. It was called The 300.
Oh, I saw it.
It was about that, but they totally removed the gay from it. And the
I
evil.
saw that. I didn't know that.
That was about those people, and the evil character they
Was the
made
gay guy.
was gay.
Yeah.
It was just like that was.
They flipped it.
I went to see it with some gay people, and they're like, "Oh, that movie was so great. The costumes were amazing." I was like, "Fuck the costume! It was all loincloths, and it was negative programming against gay people. It was horrible. They
Yeah,
rewrote
really.
history and turned it
they-
into bullshit."
Yeah, really.
Anyway, sorry. So I had this fear that I think all gay people have in this culture, and in lots of other cultures, obviously. We programmed this fear into men loving each other, and I had to be with that fear the same way I had to be with the fear of being crazy, and the fear of dying of AIDS, which is a terrifying thing. And I had to say, like, okay, what makes life worth living? To be safe or to live? To be safe or risk everything for the salvation of the human race, or at least myself. To be safe or to harness the power of humanity. Because again, I understood the power dynamic of seducing older men. I understood the power dynamic of tapping into the magic wand, of tapping into the fluid of life. And I was really into the Temple of the Psychic Youth, Topi. This was something that branched out of Aleister Crowley, Genesis Peerage, who other were the people who did this, but this idea that you created sigils and altars to channel your sexual energy into healing or creativity. So I had this, I'd been given enough information from the world that you could use your sexuality in a wise, magical way and in a healing way. And I decided that AIDS was not going to stop me from that path. So I did my best to be respectful, because I loved a lot of older men, and a lot of older men had all of their friends die of AIDS.
Right.
So I couldn't just be willy-nilly, I'm not going to use condoms and I'm not going to worry about AIDS, but I didn't like condoms. So if I were to have sex with somebody and they wanted to use a condom, I'd be like, there's so many other things we can do besides fucking.
Yeah.
And if somebody wanted me to wear a condom to like suck their dick or something, I'd be like, there's so many things we can do besides that and still enjoy each other. Like if you're afraid, I don't want to even be near your fear.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make you have reasons to be afraid. I just want you to feel comfortable and safe and loving. It doesn't have to be about a sex act. So all that being said, I would only get tested for HIV once a year, and I would do it because I wanted to be able to honestly say to people, I'm HIV negative, I've been tested. But of course, a sexually active person, they always recommend you get tested every 3 months.
And I did. I used to get tested every 3 months.
Well, and that's what they said back then, and I don't know if they press that as much on people nowadays. Anyway, so I met lots of people in my path that had HIV, and I met people who had been on lots of meds and had lots of health problems and had the Skeletor look, the really withdrawn, distorted bodies thing. And I would have conversations with some people who would just constantly talk about all their health problems, and I would say to them, so why don't you stop taking your meds and let yourself die of AIDS then? And they'd be like, and I'd be like, you're obviously so unhappy in your life.
Yeah,
Why don't you just...
I saw that too.
And they would get so offended, and I'd be like, I mean, just if you're not enjoying your life and
I
it's
saw
just
that.
health
I
problem
actually
after
saw
health
that.
problem.
Yeah, I saw that.
And then I've also met lots of people who were HIV positive and didn't ever have problems.
No problem.
In my travels.
No
And then I also met people, and they didn't have to take medications. And I also met people who had tons of unprotected sex and never got HIV.
That's right.
So when I would have unprotected sex with people and they wanted to fuck,
Yeah.
there were various times that I was a bottom or only a bottom or only a top or no anal sex at all. I went through phases in my life before I became positive that I would say, I would look at someone and I'd be like, oh, so have you been tested recently? And if they did like this, if they looked away or they tried to change the subject, then I'd be like, oh, you're not a safe person to have anal sex with. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like I would just be like, that's fine. Again, I was like, there's so many other ways we can interact. And I didn't want to use condoms. So I was like, if you can look at me and be like, yeah, I've gotten tested recently. It's fine. I'm not worried about it. Or do you know yours? If they had some kind of integrity, then I was okay with it. But I was still cautious. And I moved to New York in 2005, and I was curious about living in San Francisco, but I was pretty certain that if I lived in San Francisco, I'd get AIDS. Yeah. So I was very scared of it. I was very scared of it. So I decided to go move into New York. I decided to move to San Francisco at one point because I wanted a community, and it didn't work. And I ended up moving to New York in 2005, and I had a boyfriend, and I was very excited to live in New York. And I was trying something new. I was like, I'm going to live in the same city as my boyfriend, and I'm not going to be running around. I'm going to be with him, but I'm not going to live with him. So I don't have to worry about the collapsing of the identity thing. But a week after I moved there, his best friend died. So he was an emotional wreck. Because
So
all of his... No, I didn't.
Oh.
But he just became distant, and I became very sad. I became very sad because he still loved me. My heart was connected to him, but he was an emotional wreck because his best friend... It had been his boyfriend for 13 years. They had broken up a year and a half before, and his boyfriend didn't have AIDS, but just had a heart arrhythmia and fell asleep on an airplane and didn't wake up.
Wow.
So he was just totally destroyed by this, and he had seen tons of his friends died of AIDS, and so he just became really emotionally shut down.
Oh, afraid to get involved because the person could be taken away.
That, but also just the mourning process takes time.
Yeah.
You know, it takes years.
Yeah,
So he had been open-hearted and connected and happy to be with me, but when his best friend died, he just shut down. He stopped answering my phone calls. I would come over and be with him, and he just watched TV and be kind of a zombie. And I couldn't fault him for it, because mourning takes time. But it was my first time trying to live somewhere and be in a city, and I got really sad, and I started being abusive sexually with myself. I started doing it to distract myself from my emotional sadness, and that's when I got HIV.
Do you know the exact moment when it happened?
The interesting
Some
thing
people know.
Well, I know.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that for me is I just come to a place of peace with not worrying about HIV anymore. I had done a lot of shamanistic things that I won't get into right now about understanding what HIV was, the metaphor, and all these things. And I had come to a place of understanding that we all had AIDS. We were living in that was one of the rhetorics used at the time. We all have AIDS. You know, that we're living in this world. Some of us have AIDS, so we all have AIDS. And so I'd come to that place where I was like, we all have AIDS. It's something we're all living with. And it's not something to be afraid of. I'd come to a place where like it's no longer anything to be afraid of, because even if you get it, you'll be fine. And I didn't even think of it along the terms of drugs nowadays. If you get it, you're undetectable. You can have sex and not give it to people. And so many of the drugs do so little to you, damage-wise, compared to what they used to. So it wasn't even at that state that I was in. I was just like, I'd met so many people that didn't need meds and didn't get sick that I was like, I'd be fine. But it wasn't like that meant that I wanted it. It was just that because I had people offer it to me, because, you know, there's that whole kink.
Yeah, I know.
There's that whole kink.
Yeah.
But I would be like, no, I don't want HIV. I just no longer am afraid of getting it, and I'm at peace. And I also always assumed I would die when I was young. And I was 26 at the time, and I just had this realization one day that I was like, I'm going to be an old man.
Yeah.
And I'd never imagined I would be an old man before, and all of a sudden I was like, I'm going to be an old man. So both of those things where I like no longer was really afraid of AIDS and just had a weird faith that I would be an old man, I kind of stopped worrying about it. There was a lover I had at the time who was Jewish.
Another one.
Jewish. And he was kind of like the men that I'm so often attracted to. He smokes, I don't want to be judgmental.
What did he smoke?
He smoked cigarettes. He smoked pot. He did coke every once in a while because it was a fun thing to do. But what was amazing about, he was physically wonderful for me. He was super furry.
Was your
He was
type. He was your
broad.
type.
He had this like really gorgeous, big, broad face and this gorgeous beard. He was a blonde Jewish bear.
Yeah.
Oh, and I just, and again, like he had a crass type of personality, but his emotional sensitivity was astounding, which was mind-blowing to me because he was so crass. But when I would go and be with him, he would sometimes be like, rah, rah, his voice was very rah, 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 rah. But he would respond to minute changes in my emotions like no one else I'd ever been with. He would be able to read my emotions totally articulately, and sometimes, he'd be gruff and he'd be like, ah, but he'd be like, come here, and he'd just hold me and make everything just go, oh.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say we were lovers, but I loved him.
Yeah.
I don't know if he loved me.
He was your type.
Yeah, well, he was my type, but I had a connection with him. And we met on a bareback sex website.
Oh.
And he said he was a top and that he really wanted to fuck me, but we were meeting for months before that ever happened.
Yeah.
And so this is the query here, is that I was at this point in a broken-hearted situation with the guy I was dating because he was so distant. And I felt like our relationship was just this thing that was just disappearing and it was never really going to be anything. And I just felt so disappointed. And I was just spending all my time with clients and random hookups, really. And this guy I wanted to love, but he wasn't loving. He wasn't coming at me with a loving energy.
Right.
But he was very, but he was doing something that had a sensitivity and an intimacy. And one night, finally, he decided to fuck me. And I remember he fucked me for a while in one position, then I climbed on his lap and wrapped my legs around him, and I was riding his cock and kissing him. And I used to often have these kind of occurrences sexually where I was aware of dimensional shells around me, and I felt like spheres and squares and obelisks and rectangles aligning, like this whole globe thing integrating and changing, like the axis of the earth and the structure of the earth was changing for me. And when he came in me, it was this huge, amazing shift of energy changed. And I knew I was a different person. And I always had this dream that sex was something we did to recreate each other, and that this had happened. And that it had happened many times, but that this was one of the biggest ones that had ever happened, that something really big had happened. Yeah. And I had a cell phone back then, not a smartphone, but I had a cell phone back then, and I heard the phone ring when this happened.
Just when it happened?
And what was interesting was that at that exact moment, both my boyfriend at the time and another shaman Native American lover of mine, who's like a big guy in a shamanistic dance ritual thing, who was a lover at the time, who I had amazing magical sex with, they both called me at the exact same moment. And the messages they left for me was, Dominic, are you okay? I feel like something just happened to you.
Wow.
So I think that's the moment I became, that's the moment I think I became positive. Yeah. But when I tested positive a few weeks later, because it was like a few weeks or maybe a month later.
Like 6 months?
It can take up to 6 months. It can take as quickly as 2 weeks or up to 6 months. So it was like a month later that I started getting a cold. That was a weird cold that just lingered and lingered and lingered. And that can happen. Yeah. But that's what happens with seroconversion as well. Yeah. And I had gone to a concert. This was really nice. I went to a concert. And a lot of times in New York at the rock concerts, people just stand there. This is before the internet or the cell phones. Now everybody just stands there and holds their phones up. But at a lot of concerts, people just stand there. Yeah. And I was at this concert of this band that I love that's really about community called the Broken Social Scene. And I was jumping and dancing and just jumping. And the singer was like, you see that guy right there? Everybody look at him. Enthusiasm will save your life.
Wow.
Like everybody watch him and do that. Enthusiasm is what keeps you alive.
You know what the word enthusiasm means? Filled with God.
Filled with God. Great. No, I didn't know that. That's wonderful.
Enthusiasm. Theo. Yeah.
Enthusiasm. No, I never knew that. That's wonderful. Thank you for that gift.
Filled with God.
So that was right after that I tested positive, and I contacted this Jewish guy, and I was like, so I just tested HIV positive. And he was like, oh. And I was like, when was the last time you got tested? Because he did have himself listed as negative. And he said, 3 years ago. And I was like, dude, what the fuck?
Yeah. Then what happened?
I said, okay, will you go to the doctor and get tested with me? And he said, no, I can't do that. And he hung up the phone.
And he hung up the phone.
Yeah. And right after that, a kid who I have a long history with, but not a good history, but good history. He's the one who made me stay in New York the first time I went there. So it's kind of a good history, but there's a lot of drama. He called me and I ended up telling him what had happened. And he said, Dominic, I will go to the doctor with you to get, because I had to go back. They do an initial test. All the HIV tests, the initial tests they do test to see if you have the antibody. And if you test positive, then they test your blood to see if they actually find the virus. So I had to go back to get that test.
Right.
And so he said he would go with me.
Great.
And well, I was like, well, that's okay, but I don't really like you very much. I don't trust you, and you're kind of a nightmare. There was a lot of drama I had with this guy, but I said thank you, and then we hung up. And then the Jewish guy called me back, and he said, "I'm so sorry, Dominic. Yes, of course I'll go to the doctor with you."
Oh, good.
So then I called him back and said, "Okay, well, I don't need you to right now," and he took it personally, and he got really dramatic on me, and I was like, "I don't have any emotional time for this. Sorry, but thank you," and I hung up on him.
Right.
And so I ended up going to the doctor with this guy, and I wasn't with him. And so there's always a part of me that wonders if he lied, but he was like, no, I'm negative. So I wasn't with him when the doctor gave him his results, but he said, no, I'm negative. And I was like, okay. And I went to, he took me to a friend's house. This was very important as well. I had this thing with the number 23. He took me to a friend's house who lived on 23rd Street. And there's a big house on 23rd Street that is a home for the blind. And he just took me into his friend's house. And this is the way he was. This is modeling, right? He wasn't telling. Took me into this guy's house. And we rolled a joint and we smoked some joints. And we just sat there and talked. And I think what he was showing me is like, you can be blind and still have a really wonderful life. You can have HIV and you can have a fine life. It'll be fine. He wasn't saying that, but I think that's why he took me there.
Yeah, he wanted that message.
Yeah, he wanted me to understand that you can live with a chronic illness or disability and be okay. He also taught me something else there, is that I took apart the guy's lighter because I noticed the flame was really, really tiny.
Yeah.
And I made it so the flame was bigger.
Bigger.
Because that's what, I was like, and then my friend came back over and I was like, look, I fixed his lighter. And he was like, what the fuck is wrong with you? The guy's blind. You want to burn his fucking face off? And I was like, and he was like, you helpful people, you're the fucking worst. You always want to fix things. You always want to make things better. Just fucking let the world be as it is. And I was like, huh.
Well,
It was because I had this impulse.
It's part true and it's part not true.
Yeah.
The way he delivered the message is
You helpful
kind.
people, you're the worst.
You helpful people. Yeah,
But
you
he
helpful
told me
people.
that his last name, it was like a couple years later that he told me what he found out what his last name meant. It meant carbuncle. It's a Jewish word for carbuncle, which is like a festering boil on your skin.
Yeah.
And he was like, isn't that perfect for me? And I was like, yeah, it is.
Carbuncle.
I gave him a lot of, you were never big in the bear community, but in the bear world on the internet, there was a big bear community and people would come up with bear handles. So it would always be like Broadway bear, chocolate bear, leather bear.
Carbuncle bear.
Yeah. So no, I called him Tchotchke bear.
Tchotchke.
Because in his house, and also, I'm
had
Polish.
lots of
He was a
tchotchkes.
Polish Jew. Yeah, he had tons of just little tchotchkes, just stupid, pointless, cute little things all over his house. And he'd be like, look at these cute little lights I bought. And I was like, so I called him Tchotchke bear.
Tchotchke bear.
But, it was interesting, I guess, just to continue his story, was that he had a heart attack and almost died. And I was the first person he called. After he got, when they brought him back to life in the hospital, he was like, Dominic, I just want you to know that I love you. And I'm sorry I never said that. And I really care for you. And I'm
that's
so grateful.
beautiful.
And I hadn't seen him in years. And I was just like, thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Because I was really in love with him,
I suspect that he had AIDS.
I don't know.
You don't know?
I mean, again, he's a Pisces, and
But remember
Pisces
the
sometimes
second part of my
just so hard to be
question
true.
was, what lessons did you learn from this?
Well,
You've given a lot of
I've
lessons.
given a lot of
You've
lessons.
given a
Yeah,
lot
I need to-
well, I guess my question now to sum it up would be, can you summarize some big lesson that you got from it, or just a few smaller lessons that it taught you?
It's something I say to people a lot of the time, that fear is important to be aware of, and it's not important to let it stop how you live.
Right.
It's
Fear.
that life is not safe. I've always said this to people: life is dangerous, and dangerous is not a bad thing. You just have to be cautious and aware.
Yeah.
And so that's always been a thing that I've had, and that we're all gonna die, and in the process of dying, we're all gonna get bruised. One of the Buddhist reflections: none of us are beyond illness. We're all gonna get ill, and we're all gonna die. And so we have this impulse to be like, I don't want to ever damage this body, and I don't want to ever get, old. I don't want to get old, and I don't want to get sick. And it's something that you just have to make peace with, because it's going to happen. And that doesn't mean that you don't take care. It doesn't mean that you're not cautious. But you can't let a fear of death stop your life. You can't let a fear of illness, of imperfection. You can't let fear stop your life.
Like Roosevelt said, the only thing to fear is fear.
Yeah. Well, and you don't want to even fear fear. You want to respect it.
Yeah.
It's a useful signal from the biological mechanism.
Lizard brain.
Or from the spirit. There's sometimes that it's just like, be cautious.
Yeah, pay attention.
Pay attention.
Well, that's what parents say. Be careful.
Yeah, be careful.
Be careful. Parents just say it naturally. When the baby came, my granddaughter came, my daughter started, everything was, be careful, be careful. I said, yeah, that's what parents say. Be careful. It comes so naturally. Be careful.
Be careful.
Be careful.
And it's such a great,
be careful. Be
full of care.
Be full of care. Take care. Not
care.
be full of worry. No. But be careful. Be conscious. Be mindful.
Well, but having
be mindful would be better.
And having a caring heart.
Caring heart.
I think is a one. So when I think be careful, I think of having a caring heart. That you're really careful with the body. You're not in a worrying way, but with a gentle care of it. I love this. I love this. I love to have this experience. It's that preciousness of human life thing, which I'm not always really right there with. But I definitely have the care of other people's lives, and of my life, and of the world around.
The body's a temple.
The body's a temple. And then the other, one of the other very important lessons is that AIDS is not AIDS. HIV is it's a fact of life at this point. And it's a thing that has been a specter hanging over this. Sexual liberation was a thing in your generation.
Yeah, we came in with it.
And unfortunately, it got smacked down hard.
When I started sexual liberation, there was no AIDS. So
it got smacked, but
no
AIDS is one of the things that smacked it down hard.
It did.
Yeah, smacked it down hard, and so there was a recoil, there was a reaction, and that
there's a price to be paid if you do this.
Right, and we're in a place now where it's like, okay, we have to be like, this is not a toy. Just because we can fuck everything and do whatever we want, yes, you can, and there are prices to pay for that, and the price no longer means death. Right. However, with levels of respect, you don't have to pay even that much of a price. And it's weird. Like, I often think that HIV at this point is a blessing. A lot of people will say that it's this thing that gives you a type of awareness.
I've heard that.
And one of the things that's so great that it's done for me in my life is that I don't need to be afraid of getting HIV anymore.
That's true.
And that's such I've had friends that'll like, I gave a blowjob to a guy, and then I came home and I noticed I had blood coming out of my gums, and oh God, I wonder if I got AIDS. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. You still have to worry about that.
Yeah.
That's such a horrible feeling. I remember that feeling. I'm so glad I no longer have to ever have that feeling again. Well, as far as I know. There's always going to be something coming along. The thing is, it's part of population control. All diseases are. Nature has a way of trying to keep things manageable. And we're so clever that we're circumventing all of the population control mechanisms. And that's nice and everything, but it's not healthy and it's not sustainable. So it's a tricky thing. Like, that's one of the things I thought when people asked me before, were like, well, what'll happen to you if you get HIV?
One thing about pos guys, I've noticed they have tremendously beautiful sex drives. The pos guys are more sexy in some respects to me.
Well, because they've
lost the fear.
That fear.
They've lost
that
the
limitation.
Fear. The pos guys, I've just noticed that they're when they make love, they dive into it deeper a little bit. This has been my observation. I to my knowledge, I don't have it. So to my knowledge, I haven't had a lot of sex recently. I have had some, not a lot, and I don't want it. How it's going to interfere with my campaign for Congress if it could make it.
But I've met a lot of guys in your age range who are just like, you know what?
Oh yeah.
AIDS takes years to kill. HIV takes years to kill you. So I'm at a point in my life where I don't care anymore.
Matter, yeah.
And I'm just like, and actually, everybody who is HIV positive and is on medication can't transmit it anymore. It's like you're more likely to win the lottery and get hit by lightning. Yeah. So it's much safer, at least in countries where we have healthcare and people are on meds. And so many people are taking Truvada right now. It's just such a different reality.
And that PrEP stuff is also good.
Well, one of the things that they say that's interesting about like AIDS or HIV at this point is a nicer chronic illness to have than diabetes or heart problems. Because with diabetes and heart problems, it's much more complicated. You have much more problems. You have to watch what you're eating. You have to da-da-da-da-da-da. With HIV, you just take a fucking pill. And they still say that, there are lots of things to be worried about. Don't take this lightly. But as far as the chronic illness, because that's the model of health nowadays, is the chronic illnesses. That's how pharmaceuticals and doctors make their money. They just keep you coming in. It's like getting a subscription to the doctor.
In immunology lecture that I had, and she was like, "We're not going to talk about it."
What, about PrEP? Or about
PrEP
HIV
and
in general?
about keeping diseases exist.
Oh yeah,
So
I mean, the idea. I think it's an economic model, and again, some people think I'm such a cynic to say this, but I really think that we could come up with cures for these things, but it's more lucrative, and we do live in a. I mean, what was we were watching last night where they talk about the importance of the. Oh, it was Zach and I were talking watching something where Morgan Freeman was talking about the importance of the middle class, that we need consumers in order for the system to work, and so you just need consumers, and so if the health system is just a way of making money, we are learning how to automate industry, so we need to milk the consumers, and that's a way to milk the consumers, and it sounds like a horrific thing, and it is a horrific thing, but I think it's a fact of life at this point, and that's unfortunately what greed does. But that being said, I do think there are ways to cure yourself of HIV, and I think that PrEP is an important step right now, because it does a great job to stop the spread of HIV and other STIs, because it forces people to, if they want to keep on PrEP, it forces them to come and get tested every 3 months. And a lot of people who, and I don't mean this in a shaming kind of way, but like being sluts, there's usually some kind of level of wanting to ignore the consequences in that. I just want to be free of this, and I don't want to have to worry about it. And that causes a problem where you can carry around diseases for a long time. So if you're on PrEP, which is a way of honestly dealing with that impulse, I don't want to have to worry about it, and I want to be able to do whatever I want, then the doctors are like, okay, let's look at what's going on. Do you have any things growing in your ass or your throat, or your penis? Do you have any things that could cause other problems? And so all in all, it's actually helping really clean up the sex pool, as it were. The downside of it is that it's a really intense chemical that can cause your bones to dissolve and your kidneys to shut down and your liver to fail. So again, like with this gets into so many other things to talk about, but there's choices we make that allow us to work with pharmaceuticals to meet our needs that have high prices. And life in general, we have high prices. We can gorge and we can eat whatever we want, and it can be fun. We can go to the gym and we can take our steroids and we can get all muscly, and it has high prices. We can work jobs so we can have multiple houses and big cars, and it has its prices. So that's just what this life is about. I think the PrEP is kind of part of that it's good on lots of levels, and it has a price. Like all magic, it has a price. So mine is twice as long as yours because I'm less refined than you are. Blabbermouth.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking questions and
Were
answering
they
questions.
Good questions,
Yeah,
huh?
good questions.
Good questions.
And I
Thank you for
love
being in my
interviewing
life.
you. Yeah,
Thank you for being in my life.
Thank you for being.
I love you so much. Thank you.
It was a fun little project.
I love you so much. Oh my God. And you can feel it. I know that's part of loving you, is that you get it. Not everybody, as not everybody can open up and take that.
Well, and you said yesterday a couple times, you're so easy to love. And what I was really hearing in that is like a lot of times when people ask me, why are you single? They're like, you're such an amazing person, and you're so sexy, and you're so beautiful. Why are you single? And one of the things I often say is because I'm difficult. And so I really took it as a medicine when you were like, you're so easy to love. Because
so
one of my beliefs is that I'm difficult, because if I weren't difficult to love, people would stick around. The people who I have loved, they shut down and run away. I've had that happen over and over and over.
Yeah. See, I knew from the beginning, I'm not his type. I love him dearly. I love him with all my heart, but I'm not his type.
Yeah.
And I get that. But
so we don't have the passion, but we have a connection.
But he knows I love him, and he's got my heart. He knows that. You know that so much.
Well, and that we hug well, and that we talk well, and we be together well. We've spent good amounts of time together. Like a lot of the times we've been together have been for like a week or two. And it's so much nicer than a hookup, right?
Yeah. It's love.
It's love and
It's
friendship.
love and friendship. Yeah, it's true.
International friendship.
Yeah, we have that.
Yeah, and it's
too.
again, you're like a higher overtone. You know, you're from a different generation than me, and you're modeling a version of life that even you're like, well, I've worked with the government, I've worked with the big corporations,
Yeah,
and look, I'm still free.
yeah.
You know, that's a really powerful lesson for me to
I'm
witness.
a white knight.
You're a white knight.
I know that a white knight is someone who goes into the organizations to change them, not to be changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to become a cog in the machine.
No, but to open up the machine so it serves the people. I told my daughter, all you can do is leave the world a little better than you found it. That's all you can do. If you just leave it, that's all. That's it. No more. Just leave the world a little bit better than you found it. And I think you're doing that, Dominic. You're doing that. I love you so much. It's so beautiful to know you. I love you. Thank you. Okay. Nice way to end the interview.
Yes.
Nice
With
way to
love.
end it, with love.
Thank
Let
you,
there be
Noam.
love.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Noam. I love you too, but I don't know you.
Yeah.
See, I've known him for
Nice
years.
to meet you.
Yeah,